Relativity has offsets for all the transform properties, so position, scale, rotation, and opacity. Let's take a look at how it works. We click whatever layer we want to be the base of our offset. So I'm going to click on this first layer, and then I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to select the rest of them. Now here in position, I have the sliders at 0, 0, 0, so if I click on Apply Position, they're all going to be stacked behind my first layer that I selected. So now I can come up to the slider for the X value, and I can increase it, and all the layers will be offset at the same increment. And then we could go ahead and do the same with the Y value as well. Now it can be a little bit tough to get these values exactly where you want them, so you can manually type in values and then click on Apply Position. And then we also have the option here, if we hover over the button, we can see that if I hold down Control, it's going to subtract 1. And if I hold down Alt and click, it's going to increase by 1. So another thing that you can do here, since we probably want to animate this, is if I hold down Shift and click on the Apply button, we're going to set keyframes for position. So let's go ahead and do that. And if I come down here and look at position, we can see that we have keyframes. And then I could come out here to 1 second, and we can make modifications to this. And then obviously we could apply some easing. So I've been using my script called Arc a lot. So this makes it really easy to apply some easing here. And you get the idea. So let's go ahead and move on to scale. And I'm gonna just go ahead and delete these keyframes for now. Just kind of keep things simple. So over here on the scale tab, if I increase the X and Y, we can see that they obviously increase in size. And we have, by default, the X and Y values linked, but you can obviously unlink those if you would rather have your aspect ratio not maintained, but by default that is on. It does support 3D layers, so you do have that option. And then if we look at the scale button, obviously if I hold down Shift when I'm on the scale tab, it's going to apply keyframes for scale. On the rotation tab here, we have X, Y, and Z. Again, if we click on the apply rotation with holding Shift, we're going to apply a rotation keyframe. Just be aware that when the layers are 2D, it's going to set obviously a keyframe for rotation. If the layer is 3D, it's going to set keyframes for orientation. Okay, and so since these are 2D layers, I need to go ahead and manipulate the Z axis. And then opacity is a little bit different. If we look at the opacity of these layers, obviously they're at 100% right now. So here, if you click on calculate, it's going to automatically calculate the maximum value that you can apply. So in this particular case, if I slide this all the way down, we can see that it does a nice job of figuring out our opacity values. Change this to 50% and click on calculate. So if I click on calculate here, now we have the option of having our other layers be higher than 50% or lower than 50%. So if we increase this now we can go from our first layer, which is obviously at 50%, and then we can go all the way up to 100%. And then if we take it all the way down, it allows us to go from our 50% down to 0%. So that's why it says calculate. It's just calculating what that maximum range is for opacity. Let's take a look at some ways that you can apply offset. You don't always have to start with the top layer and then offset from there. Let's just take a look at a little example. So I'm going to select all my layers. I'm going to hold down Shift and set position keyframes. Let's come out here to, let's just say 12 frames. And let's animate these guys out. Now, I don't have a keyframe on layer 1 because it didn't move, but I'm going to go ahead and just hold Shift and click to apply a keyframe. So now I'm going to come out here to 1 second. And now I want this layer over here to be the point of reference for the offset. So I'm going to now select that layer first, hold down Shift to select the other layers. Now, to make sure they stay in the same place, I'm just going to put a negative sign in front of my initial value and click Apply. And so now nothing has happened, nothing's changed, but from here, now let's go ahead and bring our layers down. so that as we go, we see them come out and then down from this point over here. And then if I come out here to, let's just say, let's come out another 12 frames. Now maybe I want this layer right here to be the point of reference. So I'm going to go ahead and select my other layers. And maybe we'll just zero this out. And I'm going to hold down Shift and apply a keyframe. Now, I should have applied a keyframe here because now it's trying to interpolate between this keyframe and this one over here. So I'm going to undo that. So really important that we get keyframes on all of our layers. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. I'm going to come back out here and select my layer, and then I'm going to select the other ones, and we're going to go ahead and zero that out. So now it comes out, and then it comes down from the opposite side and then into this center layer here. And let's go ahead and set a keyframe for that guy. And then coming out, now I could also have this line go in two different directions. So maybe I want 4 through 1 now to animate out. And then we could have these layers over here animate maybe in the opposite direction. So I'm going to just delete the negative sign. Then I'm going to make this value here negative, so it's in the opposite direction. And then I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we have a keyframe for everybody. And so now we have this animation like so. Now, one thing that you might notice that is a problem, it could be a problem, maybe it's not, is our paths here are curved, and we probably don't want them curved in this situation. So one of the utilities we have is linear spatial keys. As long as you don't have any layers selected, it's going to apply linear paths to everything. If you have specific layers selected, it's going to apply linear spatial keys to the selected layers. So any keyframes on those layers. And then if we have specific keys selected, it's only going to change those keys. Now, in this case, I want it to apply to all of them, but just so that we can see the paths, I'm going to select all the layers and click on linear spatial keys, and we can see that those have all straightened out. I'm going to apply a quick ease here with all my keyframes using arc. And so now if we do a little RAM preview, we can see that we can create things that look more complex than they are just by changing the point of reference within the layers in the comp. The next tab we have is Matrix. First one is Relative Grid, and this is a pretty fun way to create grids. Your grid is based off wherever your first layer is positioned. So if I move this layer down, and then I select all my layers and I click on Apply Matrix. So right now I have this on 2 layers per row, and this is dynamic as well, this slider. So let's go ahead and bring this up to 4. So wherever I place my first layer, the last layer is going to be mirrored on the other side of the comp. So this makes it really nice to apply things visually. Okay, and then we can go ahead and maybe take this down to 3 if we want. We can take this up to 6. So I have 12 layers. So I'm trying to pick values that are divisible here. So this makes it really nice. I really enjoy this. And one way you can think about this is if I have this layer, and you don't have to create a guide like this, this is just to show you, but if I place my first layer here in the upper left-hand corner, then when I click apply, the last one is going to be applied down here in the opposite corner. And so let's go ahead and select everything and click on Apply Matrix. Now the relative grid is always centered around the center of the comp, but what if you don't want your grid centered? Well, we have Oblique Grid. And with Oblique Grid, you set your first layer and last layer, and the grid is created between the two. So if I have my first layer here, and my last layer is down here, now you don't have to have your first and last layer at the top and bottom of the stack. They can be any layers. I just have it set up this way. So my first layer obviously is here, and my last layer I set right here, and it doesn't matter where I put it. So my grid is going to be created. This is going to be the upper left-hand corner of my grid, and this will be the lower right-hand corner. So let's go ahead and select everything. click on Apply Matrix, and we can see that it moved into place. And now I can modify this. One thing that doesn't happen with Oblique Grid is this is not a live slider, because as this last place changes, it can create some unexpected results. So I just have to click on Apply Matrix, and there we go. And so this works out really nice for creating grids in locations other than around the center. So let's go ahead and apply this again. And obviously we can go ahead and keyframe this as well. So I can click on Apply Matrix by holding Shift to set position keyframes. And let's just go ahead and reveal those. And they did not apply, I think because I didn't have my, it's because my CTI is not in the right place. That's why. So let's go ahead and apply matrix again here by holding Shift. And so if I have my keyframes here, let's come out to 1 second. And now let's go ahead and move my first layer over here, and we'll move my last layer here. And let's go ahead and select everything and apply matrix. And so now we can animate our grid just by placing those different, you can kind of consider them key poses, I guess. And the same thing works, same thing with relative grid. So if I come out here, right, and we jump back to relative grid, and now maybe we want this centered around the center of the comp, we can select everything, apply matrix, and maybe we want to come in here and make this 4 now. And so now we can jump from 3 to 4. Now, right now it's kind of a little bit of a mess going from 3 to 4. I will show you how we can do this much neater and a little bit more predictable, instead of having it kind of make all these layers cross one another. But we'll take a look at that in just a little bit. And obviously we can see that these paths are all curved. So again, that's where that linear spatial keys works out really nice to fix that problem. And let's take a look at the option of creating controllers, because we have this controller box here, and I'm going to just go ahead and put this back on relative grid. Let's go ahead and just get something spaced back out. Now you can create a controller in either mode, relative grid or oblique grid. And let's go ahead and just click on controller. And when I do that, it's going to ask, do we want the offset of the rows and columns to be from the center or from the corner? If we click on center, it's going to be from the center of the comp. If we click on corner, it's going to be from this corner up here. So let me just click on center. So now this makes it a little bit easier to do some animation. So instead of animating all of our layers down here, we can just animate it with our sliders here. And so this is from the center, so we're offsetting our columns, and then our row spacing as well. So that makes it pretty nice. Let's go ahead and undo this, and let's just take a look at, let's apply. Got to make sure I click on controller. If we apply this, let's go from corner. Trying to make it as flexible as possible. I have some other ideas for additional sliders, but for now we just have the column and row spacing. Okay, next up we have auto row. I've been using this quite a bit, and it's really nice to get all your layers evenly spaced across your comp window. And now this is based off the first layer's position as well. So if I take my first layer, and if I position this, let's go ahead and turn on our guides here. So if the left edge of this first layer is right here along this outer margin, this safe margin here, my last layer is going to be in the exact same place. The edge is going to line up at the exact same place on the opposite side of the comp. So if I select all my layers and click on Apply Matrix, we have even spacing between all of our layers, and it ends in the exact same spot. So now if I move this in and click on Apply Matrix, same thing. Perfectly mirrored all the way across. So this is really nice, and it doesn't have to be in the center. It's going to take the Y position of the first layer and then apply it to all the other layers. And again, we can keyframe this. If you hold down Shift and click on Apply Matrix, it's going to set keyframes for position, so you can easily animate the position of these layers. Now, what if, let me just bring this down. What if we look at the layers when they're different sizes? So obviously these are all different sizes. So let's go ahead and click on the first one through the last layer and click on Apply Matrix. So it takes size into account, and this layer just looks like there's two layers next to each other. I shouldn't have made it the same size. Let's just change this really quick. So if I click on the first layer through the last layer and click on Apply Matrix, nothing happens because that space is the same. But makes it really nice when you have several layers of different sizes and you need to get them spaced out evenly within your comp. So we also have the option for auto column. So auto column is the same way. So if we bring this at the top, and let's just look at it without any scaling here at first. So if I select the first layer through the last layer and click on Apply Matrix, it's going to do the same thing. Now I have a few layers that it's making it look like it's all one column here. So let's go ahead and do this again. Got rid of a couple. And it's just going to evenly space those out vertically. And of course, I can bring this down closer and it's going to be mirrored as the distance. So the distance from the top of the comp to the top edge is the same as the bottom of the comp to the bottom edge. And then if we come out here and look at if we have different sizes, let's go ahead and move this up so we can actually see. And again, I have this layer right here is really long. Let's go ahead and just get rid of that one. And we'll get the idea anyways. They still have too many layers. They're just probably wasn't the best set of layers. Okay, anyways, you get the idea. Regardless of the size, the spacing is the same all the way through. So this makes it really nice for setting up columns. And so we can actually use this too for text. So this makes it really nice. If I just come in here, if I have this text and I want it equally spaced out, I can just click on the first layer and then select them all. I'm going to click on Apply Matrix. And so this makes it really nice. And then if I come in here and change the scale of this one, and I don't know, let's maybe scale this one down. We can get perfect spacing every time and gives you a lot of flexibility as far as creating text animations with multiple layers. Okay, one of my favorite modes is Oblique Diagonal. So Oblique Diagonal works off the position of the first and last layer, and it's just going to make a diagonal between the two. Since we had rows and columns, we had to get diagonal in there. It does work better than I had anticipated, and it's kind of fun when you have shapes that are different sizes. So here's my first layer, and my last layer is over here. And so obviously we can make a diagonal line between the two. But now, because these are all different sizes, it's going to try and keep the spacing horizontally the same and then vertically the same as well. So one thing you might notice over here is when I put it on, so I had it on auto column, but when I switched this to oblique diagonal, we had three different modes. So HV stands for horizontal and vertical. So it's going to try and maintain horizontal and vertical spacing. H, it's only going to focus on horizontal spacing. And then V is for just vertical spacing. And we'll take a look at why you might want to use those other modes. But if I click on the first layer, and then the last layer and run Apply Matrix, we get this nice organization of these layers. The spacing left to right between each layer is the same. And then the spacing between each layer, it tries to maintain them. And then when we get layers like this that are a little bit longer, we get these nice patterns going on, and I think it's kind of interesting. Definitely a nice way to organize a lot of layers that are irregular. And so if I just move this down, like we can move this one up, and each time we're going to get something that's just a little bit different just based off the positions of these layers. And of course, we can hold down Shift and set keyframes for this, and so all this can be animated. So that makes it pretty nice. It's also nice to use on text. So if I move the word dynamic over, and I'll move size over, and if we apply our diagonal, it kind of changes, not kind of, it does change based off the size of the text. So if because it's trying to maintain horizontal and vertical spacing, these layers are much wider than they are tall, and so we get shifts in the layout based off size. So if I come here to text and if I increase this now, and let's go ahead and apply this. And one thing that is kind of nice is if I come here at the start, I'll hold down Shift and click on Apply Matrix to set position keyframes. And then let's come out here to, I don't know, let's come out here to 2 seconds. And I'm going to just kind of switch them. So dynamic will move to the left, size will move to the right. And let's go ahead and apply matrix. And so now we get this text animation that is really easy to set up here. Now another cool thing is if you have a pattern, a series of layers that are regular, so not a bunch of irregular shapes like we had before. So here we get more of a predictable pattern now that we have a regular series of images here. So this is pretty nice, and it's fun to play with different shapes and make patterns. And I think this would be really nice for some different motion graphic projects. Let's take a look at the other modes and see why you might want to use them. So right now, all of our anchor points here line up in a perfectly straight line. But let's go back to, let's go back to diagonal text, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the keyframes. Now, if let's just move dynamic over. And if we apply this, you can see that the anchor points do not form a straight line because of that balance between trying to space horizontally and vertically. So if you need these in a perfectly straight line, we can go ahead. Now for this, since these are wider than they are tall, I already know from experience that I want to put this on vertical. And if I do that, now if we take a look at our anchor points, they are all perfectly lined up. Okay, so if you need your anchor points perfectly lined up for something like this, then that works out pretty well. Let's also go back to this here because this will be a good example for the other one. So if I run this again in my normal HV mode, we get what we've already seen. But obviously the anchor points are nowhere near in a line, but if I put this on horizontal, it's going to adjust these layers vertically so that all the anchor points are lined up. And oops, sorry about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on Apply Matrix with H mode here, horizontal. And now we can see that all these anchor points are perfectly lined up here. And that makes it pretty nice. Now, for something like this, if you come over here to the vertical mode, it doesn't really work, okay, because of the layer sizes. So that's why we have different modes to combat those different types of layers. Because too, if I come over here back to diagonal text, and if I put this on, if I have this on horizontal mode, we get kind of a mess here. So that's why we have the different modes available. Just be aware too that the spacing is based off the anchor point being in the center of these. So in order for the script to accurately determine the size of the layer and the spacing, the anchor point needs to be in the center of the layer. Now, it just has to be set in the center vertically here. Now I could go ahead and move all my anchor points to the one side. So maybe if I put this on, let's go to auto column, we can line them all up along this left side. And then if I put this on oblique diagonal, again, it's just going to line them up according to wherever that anchor point is. So that's another way to give you some dynamic layouts based off changing some anchor points. So maybe with text here, I'm going to go ahead and put the anchor point in the center. And now if I select everything, we get a little bit different look just based off moving the anchor points around. Okay, let's take a look at the option of bake here. So bake works when you have controllers, and so sometimes using all these different modes together, you may want to use a controller for part of it and then jump out of having a controller. And so bake will allow you to do that. So if we come down here and look at the position of all these layers, obviously it has an expression applied, and I'm using the controller here to have the grid animate out and then in. So as long as no layers are selected, it's going to bake your entire comp. And then if I select some layers, it's only going to bake the selected layers. So I'm going to unselect them all because I want to go ahead and bake everything since the only thing in this comp is my grid. So I'm going to click on Apply Matrix, and with the Bake option, we have some different options that we can look at. So when this gets converted from the expression, it's going to convert the expression to keyframes. Now we can delete all the keyframes that it generates, and if it does that, we're going to lose our animation. And I can't scrub the timeline right now, but we're going to lose our animation because all these layers will basically just have this position at the CTI locked in. So that's one option. Another one is keep all the keys. So it's going to generate keyframes for the whole duration of the comp, and so we can keep all the keys. Now that can get a little bit messy because it's just a lot of keyframes, one key for every frame. Now we can keep frames in just the work area. So since I know that my animation stops here at 1 second with the controller, I can set the end of the work area, and it's only going to keep keyframes for the work area, and it's going to keep keys for every frame within the work area. And then the last option is Smart Delete, and Smart Delete is going to look at the keyframes, and as long as the position value is changing each frame, it's going to keep them. As soon as the value of the position stops changing, it's going to delete those keys. So I like Smart Delete. It works out really nice if you already have an animation. Just be aware that if your comp is really long, it can be a little bit slow. You might think that your computer is froze, but it takes a little bit. It's got to go through each layer and process it, and then it's got to go through and delete all the keyframes. So this comp is only 3 seconds, so let's go ahead and just say OK and take a look at what we get at the end. And since I don't have any layers selected, it's going to process everything. It's going to delete that controller. And if we look at our position here, you can see that just the range of the animation, we have hold keyframes, and so we still have our animation that we created. And now we can go ahead and we can do other animations with the other modes within Relativity. Okay, Relativity has a radial mode as well, and the default mode is relative. And so it's relative from the center of the comp. So if I select a layer and I move it out here, the radius is going to be from the center of the comp to that first layer selected. So let's go ahead and select them all, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Apply Radius, and there we go. And so if I wanted to animate this radius, I could just move this in now and click on Apply Radial again. And of course, if I hold down Shift, I'll set position keyframes as always. This first slider here is for distribution. So right now it's at 360. So if I bring this down to like 180, see if I can get this. Let's go ahead and hold down Control and click. And so it's only going to cover 180 degrees. Now, one thing you might notice is that it's not quite 180 degrees because it's taking into account spacing for one more layer here, just the way it's being calculated for the 360. So the way we get around that is we check Fill and then click on Apply Radial. So anytime you have something less than 360, you can go ahead and check on Fill, and then that's going to make sure that that complete angle is filled in. And so we can obviously come in here and change this to whatever we want. So let's go ahead and put this back at 360. And just be aware that if you leave Fill on, there's a layer behind this one here. So I need to uncheck Fill and click on Apply. just to make sure we see all the layers now that we're back at 360. And then obviously we can offset these. Now, if I put this at 0, well, let's go back to -90. This is the default. And let's go ahead and just make this layer red. And if I put this at 0, by default, it wants to start the radial array from here and then go clockwise. And so that's why I had this set at -90. Just so that, I don't know, for some reason I expect the first layer to be at the top, and so that just allows that to happen. And then just like before with the grid, we also have oblique mode here. And so since we don't always want our radial array to be centered around the center of the comp, maybe we want it somewhere else, so I can grab my first layer here and move it off anywhere I want. And then my last layer, I'm going to go ahead and move right here. The diameter is going to be determined between these two layers. So let's go ahead and select them and click Apply Radial. And so now we can make our radial arrays in any place within the comp. They don't have to be in the center here. So there's one interesting thing though with the oblique mode that we should take a look at. So if I take a look at my last layer, and let's just go ahead and colorize that green, and let me turn off the guides. So I'm going to set this layer here, and then my last layer I'm going to go ahead and set here. Now this layer here, this last one that you set, does move. It will become the last layer up here since it goes clockwise from the top all the way around. Even though you're setting your last layer here, this only indicates where the diameter is going to be. Okay, it's going to move though, as long as that's the last layer selected. So if I select my first layer, which is the red, and then my last layer is the green square, and click on Apply Radial, we can see that that layer did move here. So when you're in oblique mode and you're setting your last layer down here, that does not mean that that's where that layer is going to be. It's only there temporarily to set the diameter. Okay, so I'm going to go back to relative mode here, and let's take a look at the controller options. So as always, we can go ahead and hold down Shift, and we can click on Apply Radial if we want to set keyframes. And so we can easily, like I said, animate this in and out by just changing the position of the first layer here in relative mode. But what if we want to animate these other options? Because if I have like my distribution angle, I can't animate this, because if I try and go from 0 all the way to 360, the layers are going to take the shortest path to get there, and so they're not going to be animated along that arc. So this is where our controller works out really nice for radial. So let's go ahead and apply this. And so we had two options here. We can go directional or bidirectional. Let's look at directional first. It's going to come out, and we can go the opposite direction too. So it just depends on which way you'd like to animate it. So directional, they all are going one direction. And then we can put this back at 360. Makes it really easy to animate the radius if we want. And then we can also offset our layers. And then we also have the option, so if I put this on like 180, we also have the option here with that fill checkbox to make sure we're at a complete 180. Now we can animate these, and then we can, like we've already seen, we have the option to bake our keyframes as well. And so really easy to jump from a controller and then out of the controller. So let's take a look at the other option if we want to create bidirectional. So with this, and so now we can animate them in both directions at the same time. So that's what bidirectional is. Let's take a look at duplicate. So duplicate, since we're dealing with multiple layers, it'd be nice to be able to duplicate them really easily and quickly. So here we have a circle and a square, obviously. So if I select them and click on duplicate layer, it's going to ask how many layers do I want. I'm just going to say 12. And the nice thing is however many layers you have selected, it's going to sequence through those layers until it creates a grid based off the number that you put in. Now, if you put in a value that it can't do, let's just say like 11, it's going to fill in the grid as much as possible. This is using the same method, very similar to the relative grid, but it's going to try and center it within your comp here. And obviously, if we don't have a complete grid, it doesn't matter because we have other tools to be able to manipulate these. So this is just kind of a starting point instead of having them all stacked on top of each other. So another tool is called Normalize Scale, and it's pretty common to have a variety of source imagery at different sizes. So if we want to make these look nice in a grid, we should probably make them all the same size. So we have this tool here called Normalize Scale, and let's just click on icon 1, which is the bike, and then I'm going to select everything and click on Normalize Scale. Now when that happens, it's going to tell me the size of my first layer that I selected in pixels. So it's 143 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. And the X value is going to be automatically filled in our input box here. And then we can resize based off the largest dimension, the width, or the height. So let's just say I want everything to be the same width, and I want them to be the same width as my bike here. I'll say OK. And so now we get our imagery that's all the same pretty much. Now, one thing is, so this is a little bit different, right? Because if we're looking at the height and the width, it definitely looks bigger than this one. So let's try this again. And let's click on Normalize Scale, and let's just leave it on larger dimension. And that's probably something a little bit better for this layout here. When we were looking at the offsets, we looked at linear spatial keys utility here, but just to reiterate, sometimes we get these curved paths and they may not produce paths that we want. So we can just select our layers or keyframes or select nothing to convert all of our keys to linear spatial keys. So let me just select my layers so that we can actually see the paths and click on linear spatial keys, and that'll clean up our animation a bit there. The other thing that we have is work area keys. So if I end my work area here and click on work area keys, it's going to select all the keys in the work area if I don't have any layers selected. If I have some layers selected, it's going to select all the layers in the work area for those layers. So this makes it really nice if I want to come in here and apply different eases to those keyframes on those layers. I could jump in there and make modifications to just those keys, and it's a lot nicer than having to come down here and marquee select keyframes all the time. So when combining these different modes, it's important to understand the order that they will be placed. So here we obviously just have a grid, and I'm on relative grid. As long as the first layer is on the upper left-hand side here, they're going to be numbered left to right, top to bottom. So we can just go ahead and click Apply Grid. And then if I move the one over here to the opposite side, they will be numbered in the opposite direction. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And then if I bring the one down here and click on Apply, we can see that we're going 1, 2, 3, left to right, bottom to top. Okay. And also, if we take a look at the radial, and this is on relative, so let me bring this down a little bit. This, like I've already said, it starts at the top and comes around clockwise. And then pretty easy to figure out that with our auto row, we're going to just be left to right here, and then obviously top to bottom here. And we got to make sure that that's on column. Okay, a little bit crowded there, but you get the idea. So let's take a look at this really quick if we want to just do some simple animations. So on relative grid, I'm gonna go ahead and actually put this on, I guess we'll leave it on 3. So let's say that I want to animate from 3 layers per row to 4. And so let's go ahead and get them a little bit tighter. So I'm going to go ahead and select all my layers here, and I'm going to hold down Shift and to set a position keyframe. And I'm going to come out here to 1 second, and now I need to select them in the order that I want them to animate. So I want 1, 2, and 3. Now I want this layer, as these layers slide over, because we're going to have 4, I want this layer to move up. And so that's going to be layer number 4. And then I want 4, 5 to make the next row, and then 8 and 9. So the 8 will slide up and the 9 will slide up to the next row. And then my last row can be 7, 10, 11, 12. So now if I put this on 4, let's take a look at this animation. So we get something a lot more organized than what we saw before. Okay, so this is looking a lot nicer than having layers cross over one another. And so then if we look at our position, just so we can get an idea here where we're at, let's just come out here to 2 seconds to make it simple. Let's go ahead and animate now from the grid to a radial array. So let's go ahead and take number 1, and I'm going to turn on the guide so I can see where I'm at. And let's just put number 1 here. So now we have to think about the order that we want for our circle. So let's go 1, and then this will be number 2. So that'll be over here. And then 3, 6. Let's just go this way so that, so I've done this just a couple times. So let's go ahead and click on Apply Radial. And so now we get this nice motion here. And I'm going to go ahead and select all my keyframes. Let's go to the utility. I'm going to turn on linear spatial keys. And let's go ahead and let's bring arc in here. And I'm going to go ahead and apply some easing. So let's go ahead and just ramp preview this. Okay, so now let's maybe go from our circle here to, let's maybe go to a column, and this is going to get a little bit dense. I might have to scale these down a little bit, but I'm going to move my 1 up here, and then I'm going to alternate between the sides. Basically our circle gets collapsed down. So that would be 1, and then let's just alternate between the 2 sides. And let's go ahead and jump back to matrix. Let's go auto column and apply. And I'm going to go ahead and just apply a quick ease here. Okay, let's just come out here a couple more frames, and I'm going to select all these guys. Let's jump to scale. And let's just scale them down so that we don't get any overlap. And let's do a ramp preview. Hopefully that will get you started thinking about how you can animate between the different modes. I'll have another tutorial coming up where we can dive into this a little bit deeper, but that's Relativity. I hope it helps you on your projects. Shoot me a link to anything you create with it. I'd love to see it. Thanks for watching.